Alrighty, everyone. It is by my clock 3 minutes past the hour. It is 8:03 at Eastern Time, the spookiest time on the spookiest day of the year, October 30th. I don't know why, but let's just go with it. It's the spookiest day of the year, the day before Halloween. So, thank you all so much for being here, whether you are watching live or whether you sent in questions, and I'm going to answer them in a little bit, or if you're watching this later. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of be here for this little impromptu AMA session that I'm doing for Dracula, the Danse Macabre, the new indie show that I'm doing. Who am I? My name is Gabriel Urbina. I am a podcaster and a fiction creator and just kind of like an online storyteller. I made Wolf 359. I co-created 0 Hours and Unseen and a couple of other shows. And I'm really excited to be back making my first wholly indie, wholly independent kind of artist-owned show in a little while. So I got a bunch of great questions in the form that we set up this afternoon. I'm sure that folks are going to put more great questions in the chat, so feel free to just kind of like start putting those in there and I'll whittle them down. I'm going to try my best to kind of be bouncing back and forth between the form and the chat. Before we do that, if we have folks that are watching live, I would just love, for my own sanity, if you can see me, if you can hear me, could you just put a 1 in the chat? Just so that I know that the stream is good, that my voice is coming through. It can be a little unnerving to be doing these things because sometimes you don't know if you are just speaking into the void and it's going nowhere. So if you can see me and you can hear me and you are watching this live, if we just put a 1 in the chat, that would be amazing and would do a lot to assuage my worries. And if everyone is kind of watching this after the fact, that's great. I see a 1 in the chat. Thank you, Grove Simpson. I love you and I see you very much. All right, awesome. In that case, why don't we get started? Let's take some questions. If you have them, put them in the chat. I'm going to get started with one from the form that we set up this afternoon, one that somebody sent in advance. So the first question for tonight about Dracula, the Danse Macabre. And by the way, just like general table setting, I'm going to try as hard as I can to walk the line between giving honest, thoughtful answers to everything that you ask and avoiding anything that is an outright spoiler. So, if you ask, how does the show end? I'm not going to be able to do a lot there. But especially sort of anything that is like, what do you think about this? Or how are you thinking about that when you make the show? What do you think about like this thing in the book? Are you bringing it into your thing? I'm going to be doing my absolute darndest to be answering those questions the best I can without just kind of being like, at the end of the book, this happens. Or at the end of the podcast, rather, this happens. I also, just like for the ability to talk kind of like freely about this, I'm going to consider this kind of a like mild spoiler zone for the 100-year-old book that I'm adapting. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm just going to like start spouting spoilers about the novel for no reason. But if there is something that asks me about an element of the book, I'm going to like consider it fairly fair game to discuss kind of the public domain original version of Dracula. All right, which brings me to the first question from the form that I'm going to answer. Are there any non-spoiler changes to vampire lore? Yes and no. So for the most part, I'm sticking pretty closely to the classics. Vampires can't go out into the sun. Vampires, no reflection in a mirror. Stake through the heart destroys them. They don't like anything that we might consider a holy symbol. They need to be invited into your home to be able to enter your home. Kind of all of the mainstays are there. I'm adding a few things that may or may not be like super commonly canon, depending on which like version of vampires you take. But by and large, I'm kind of doing my best to stick to the way that vampires work in the Bram Stoker novel, by and by, as best as we can, anyway. The things that we are changing are a lot of the reasoning for why vampires have these powers and these limitations. Because if you have read Dracula, and you're anything like me, you find that aspect of the book a little bit of a shortcoming of the novel, I would say. It is a book that has a lot of really, really great ideas and really sort of like vivid set pieces. But when it comes to acknowledging and answering sort of why vampires work that way, a lot of the time it tends to just be, well, the devil did it, which I don't like, because if the devil did it, it kind of implies that the devil is real, which also kind of implies that like the Christian conception of like the world and the afterlife and cosmology is the correct way to look at the world, which I don't quite like doing that. So for example, my version of it, there's a different reason for why vampires are afraid of a cross that isn't just, well, God is real and the power of God compels vampires. So that's kind of the sort of thing that we have tried our best to do, where, we are keeping the sort of general framework of how vampires work. But we are sort of switching around and remixing the how and the why. So yeah, so that's what I would sort of say. Kind of a new spin on familiar vampire lore, which I think is kind of the ethos of most of this show. Kind of, like a remix of the novel. I think that there's very little that we are kind of just like inventing out of whole cloth, but we're moving a lot of pieces around and kind of giving new justifications for things. Okay, question from the chat. He's an underrated character and adaptations never do him well, so I gotta ask. Art Holmwood? Will he exist? Will I be able to love him as I do in the novel? A great question. So one of the things that we are doing is we are really kind of presenting the story of Dracula sort of as told as a dialogue between Mina and Jonathan Harker. So kind of the spotlight really is kind of on them, but I've done my best to give every major character in the book at least sort of a spotlight moment, or at least kind of like something where they really affect the plot in some meaningful way. I'm not going to pretend that Art Holmwood is a huge part of this podcast, but he's in there and he plays a very, very pivotal role when his moment in the sun comes. I think that we kind of have a very lovable version of Art Holmwood. I think that to say more than that would verge on spoiler territory. So yes, Art Holmwood, not the largest part of this world, not the largest part of this remix, but he's in there, he matters, and I think that he does very right by the narrative that he's in. Okay, another question. Any spooky organs in the score? There are so many spooky organs in the score. Alan Rhodey is composing the original score to the show. And Alan Rhodey has a long history of being kind of a master of like all instruments as far as he can tell. I've yet to kind of run into an instrument that Alan doesn't seem to know inside and out and can't play extraordinarily well. But when I met him, he was doing a lot of organ playing. And so kind of getting to do not just kind of like a horror show, but a big, bombastic, kind of like larger than life gothic horror show. Oh yeah, there's organs in there. There's a lot of organs in this soundtrack. Even to the point where at a certain point in our conversation, Alan kind of even went like, I think that maybe I need to like get you some like organ free tracks. We might be going like a little too hard on the organ. Which I don't know that you can go a little, I don't think that you can go too much on the organ when it's a Dracula property. I really think that like you just kind of like go all out. But yes, lots of spooky organs in there. It's a lot of fun. I think that there may even be some organ in the 3 preview tracks that we've shared of Alan's work. I'll need to double check on that. But yes, be assured, the organs, they're coming. They're a very big part of the musical score for the show. Yes. All right. I've got another couple of questions from the forum, actually quite a few of them. But just a reminder, if you are watching this live, put your questions into the chat and I'll do my best to kind of ping pong back and forth between them and try to see if we can answer everything. All right. From the forum, somebody sent in this question. Are there more actors to be announced, or are Evangeline and Peter multi-rolling for all the characters? It is just Evangeline and Peter for these 4 episodes. If we end up making more of this show, and that's a conversation that we can have on December 26th, once everyone has kind of listened to these first 4 episodes and see what we did, that might be kind of a bigger conversation. But for this sort of like first season and for kind of the story of the novel of Dracula, it is just Evangeline and Peter doing absolutely everything. Multi-rolling is, I think, like even selling what they're doing a little bit short. They are really kind of creating this like full cast of 15 characters just between the 2 of them. And it is incredible. They are creating such vivid, amazing people with all of these different inflections of their voices, putting on accents, putting on all these different affectations, sometimes just even like by sheer acting, like kind of just these like very small tweaks in their voice, but you can still hear it and kind of go, oh, that's a totally different person. And I can really follow the 2 of you having this conversation, even though the 2 of you is actually just Evangeline talking with herself, or Peter having kind of this like correspondence with himself. They're absolutely astounding. And it was sort of the early conceit of the show. I had, for kind of a long time, wanted to do a take on Dracula and just had absolutely no idea on what the take was. It's just one of those things where it's like, oh, it'd be fun to have an idea of how to adapt Dracula one day. And then just like my brain kind of going like, great, and now I've done the hard part, clock out. And over here I was going, no, you need to actually have an idea now. What's the idea? What's the take? And I was there for about 5 years, just kind of like not having a take. And then last year I went to London and I got to see Eddie Izzard perform her version of Great Expectations live on the West End. And that was something where it was a solo show, where it was just the amazing Eddie Izzard doing every character in Great Expectations and kind of doing it as a one-woman show. And number 1, I thought that it was brilliant. And number 2, I sort of had like that light bulb moment of like, oh, and that's the take on Dracula. It's Dracula done by 2 people. And because it is kind of a story that is told in documentation and through correspondence and through these things, you can justify it as it is these 2 researchers that are piecing everything together and reading these things to one another. And finally I was like, okay, that's the take. So it is just Peter and Evangeline, although trust me, having heard the like near final mix of episode 1, you forget that it's only 2 people in this. They create such a like wild, vivid world. Okay. Another question. I just started reading Dracula for the first time. Welcome to this wonderful world of madness. It's one of my favorite books. I'm only a few chapters in. My question, why is Jonathan such a big old weenie? Oh, Jonathan is kind of a little bit of a weenie. I love Jonathan. He's a big part of this show. But a big old weenie feels like a fairly appropriate way of describing it. I don't. How much can I answer this for my version of Jonathan? I'll say this. Jonathan, especially in the novel, is, in my eyes, meant to be a representative of kind of what it meant, of what it means to be this like old model working class British person, or sort of not like working class may be the wrong way to put it, but sort of this kind of like, you know, educated member of the upper class without being a nobleman, the way that Lord Godalming is eventually a nobleman. And I think that he is meant to kind of just like be so prim and so proper in such a British way. And especially early on in the novel, it is almost always to his discredit or to his downfall. It is almost always a thing that ends up harming him in some way, especially during the early chapters of the novel, where he is just ignoring every red flag imaginable and just kind of being like, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this. And so much of that book, which is kind of a book about characters confronting modernity and sort of evolving into a new sort of like way of thinking about the world, is about him kind of leaving that behind. So I would just sort of say, keep going, keep reading, keep giving Jonathan a chance. There's a reason why he's played by Keanu Reeves, but he's also like a wonderful, wonderful character. So yes, I say that with absolutely no shade to Keanu Reeves. That is just sort of now like such an emblematic thing in my head of kind of just like that take of his, of Jonathan in the Bram Stoker's Dracula movie. Which we're doing something fairly different from in our own version of Dracula. All right, let's see. What's it like to work with 2 actors for so many characters, as opposed to several actors doing 1 or 2 roles each? It's fascinating because it's almost like scene work takes a back seat in some way, because normally when you are working with when you're working with kind of a full cast of characters, you work it at the level of, I want you to understand the character, and then it becomes sort of this, let's like really work on the scene level. What is the emotion in this moment? What is the tension in this moment? What goes fast? What goes slow? Do this way, do it that way. When you are doing something like this element arrives in the middle, which is just like working at things on a vocal level, which is just kind of this like, okay, how are we distinguishing these 2 people from one another? What are you doing with your voice? And it sort of becomes this very delicate castle that you need to maintain every corner of, because it then sort of, it's easy enough when it's just like 2 roles, because it's kind of this like, all right, Peter, you can play him a little bit posher and play him a little bit rougher. And it's fine when it's 2 people. You add like 1 more person and it's like, all right, and he can be, sort of this different type of voice. But the moment that you have one actor playing about 8 different characters, sometimes even more than 8 characters, you then all of a sudden start to kind of have to keep track of, have we already done that? Is that an affectation that we need to save for someone else? Can you just sort of like keep generating new characters? And that became sort of, in a lot of ways, the place where a lot of rehearsal and a lot of attention and a lot of discussion went. into sort of creating the catalog of voices, which was a new, fun challenge. And I don't think one that I would have been able to do when I was just starting off on my career as a voice acting director. So it was very, very fun to kind of get to do that and sort of get to be like, oh, this is a different place to be doing this. Have you seen the Van Helsing movie? Is it just bad or can't be bad? It's good. This is I'm assuming that this is Van Helsing, parenthesis 2003 with Hugh Jackman. If it is, I saw that movie when it came out because I was 13 at the time and I saw everything that came out. It was one of those things where, the Hugh Jackman movie. I'm getting the clarification in the chat. Look, I'm one of those people that, like, I don't like to kind of get on any kind of public message board and kind of go, this art piece that people spent a lot of time making and putting together and that probably a lot of thought and energy and effort and soul went into is just bad. It's pretty bad, man. Like, I had whatever the opposite of taste was when I was 13 years old. And even at the time, I was like, this movie is a mess. And I will say, among its many flaws, and that is one that just, like, fundamentally in a script level has a lot of problems, I think that it has one of the most underwhelming Draculas that is on screen. And I say that as now someone that has seen just, like, as many Dracula movies as I can possibly get my hands on over the years. So no, I don't think that there's a lot of, like, campy, so bad it's good fun to be had there. I think that if you want something like that, there's like a lot of great, I just got the prompt in the chat of like, all right, name some favorites. There's a lot of great ones out there for just kind of like schlocky horror fast stuff, like, you know, like the Hammer horror films are amazing. The first one with Christopher Lee and with, oh my god, this wonderful gentleman who plays Grand Moff Tarkin, whose name I'm forgetting, who plays Van Helsing in that. That is kind of like, for me, like the you know, ideal Dracula versus Van Helsing movie, because it's sort of this like fast, it's schlocky, it's the two of them kind of like coming together and like the chess match of, can the vampire hunter beat the vampire? That one is a lot of fun. The Frank Langella one from the 70s is one that caught me totally off guard. I heard somebody mention it and I sort of went like, I'd never even heard about it. Frank Langella is an amazing Dracula. Might be one of the most like charismatic on-screen Draculas. They kind of throw the story completely out the window, but what they come up with is a lot of fun. And it has an amazing score. It is a Dracula score written by John Williams. Why more people don't know that this thing exists is beyond me, because it is a lot of fun. Other ones, I have an incredible soft spot for the Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1994. Purely kind of on a like film, it's 1994? 1992, I think it is actually what it is. Purely just kind of like on a tech film level. That film looks unbelievable, and all of the stuff that they're doing with shadows and with practical effects, it is the sort of thing that you nowadays you watch it and for a second you're like, why does that look so amazing? And it is this thing that is like, oh, because you couldn't do it in CGI, you couldn't fake this, so you actually had to do these things, and that future proofs it in this way. You know, the story is all kinds of nutty in ways that I think like verge on campy, it's bad so it's good territory, but just kind of like on a sheer visual level, that's a movie that does some like really, really cool like Dracula stuff. Let's see, other really good Dracula films. For just kind of like people that love the book and just kind of want like the straightest adaptation possible, the BBC did a version of it with Louis Jourdan in the 1970s that is like the best distillation of the book that you could possibly get. It is just like, boom, like the entire book done in like 2.5 hours. And Louis Jourdan is sort of this like very good, forceful, charismatic, but very evil Dracula. So I'll say those four, and I see, do I have a favorite adaptation of Dracula in any way, direct or reimagination? I will also throw in the Orson Welles audio adaptation, which was the first episode that he did at the Mercury Theater, which is like Dracula on super fast forward. It's like everyone involved in the cast slammed 5 espressos before they got started because they only had like an hour to get through the entirety of the story. And so they just did it, but it is an amazing audio adaptation of it. And for another kind of like weird, nutty, out there, but like I think like really fun take, I really, really like the BBC version from 2020, the Clay's Bang version of it. I think is really, really fun. All right. Yes, chat. Espressos maybe something that maybe they may have been taking other things. Okay, other question. Those are great movie recs. What about prose or pods or other formats attempt? Any that showed up in subtle ways in Danse Macabre? Yeah, a couple of them. I am a fan of a couple of the play adaptations of Dracula. There is the Neil LaBute. This does a really fascinating version of it with a female Van Helsing that I sort of thought like, oh, this is really cool. And while I don't just kind of like take that, and just kind of go like, I'll be having that idea, thank you very much. It is kind of something where, I love a great face-off. Like any scene that is like Dracula facing off with like another character, I love in kind of any version of it. So the Neil LaBute play, I think that like that had like a big impact on it. I mean, for kind of like, I'd have to admit there is some amount of the Buffy version of Dracula in here, especially kind of in that like search for what is kind of the explanation of how Dracula has all of these powers that regular vampires don't have. And, the tossed off explanation from Buffy didn't really work, but then I kind of took like a lot of like note of like, oh, but like there's something about the presence and the way that he works that is there. And absolutely, I see you, chat. There is quite a bit of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in my own version of Mina, but I also think that there is a lot of Mina Harker in kind of the tradition of female action heroes fighting monsters. That sort of, like I think that if you work your way up from Buffy, you eventually arrive at Mina. So I think it is a little bit of a virtuous cycle there. And then hysterically, a lot of the things that I've been thinking a lot about are things that are novels that are either earlier than or contemporaneous to Dracula. So there's quite a bit of sort of tonal echoes of Mary Wollstonecraft in there. There is quite a bit of Carmilla. There is quite a bit of Edgar Allan Poe. There was some reading about sort of stuff about Bram Stoker's life and kind of contemporary work. So sort of just kind of like anything that was like spooky or vampire-y or Bram Stoker-y, I kind of just like put it all in the blender and just kind of then like saw what emerged as I went through like yet another reread of the book. So yeah. Okay, I'm gonna switch over to another question from the form. Which Wolf 359 character would enjoy Dracula the Danse Macabre the most? I saw this question earlier and I have no reason to believe this. I have no reason to articulate why this is so firmly in my mind. I think that Kepler would love this show. I think that Kepler would be obsessed. And I have been trying, ever since I saw this question a couple of hours ago, to find what the like reason for my brain to alchemically have arrived at that conclusion is. And I cannot tell you. But I think that Kepler would be downright obsessed. All right, let's see. Another question from the chat. In your researching slash rereading the book and mining it, what did you notice that you chose not to bring in? And why, if so? I mean, I sort of already went in with the conceit and with the focus in mind. Um, so, I sort of knew it is going to be a conversation between two characters. It is going to be two actors. And so there was sort of this like, how can we really be focusing the story on what revolves around these people, on sort of what is, you know, relevant to them, and kind of what, because, there's a couple of things where you could put it in, but you sort of find yourself kind of going like, oh, that was a little bit of an escape valve. That makes things a little bit easier for our heroine or for our hero. We kind of want it to not be easier. We kind of want to keep the tension up. We really want to keep the heat up. And so it's a little bit of a, um, you know, more focused and more whittled down version of the story. I definitely noticed upon my umpteenth rereading of it how much I enjoy the puzzle box aspect of it. How much I sort of like enjoy all those moments in the book where, as a reader, you are kind of invited to not immediately understand why you're reading something, and then getting like a little bit of it over here or an explanation for it in a little bit. Um, so, for example, the article that is in the book about the escaped wolf from the zoo. And I remember just kind of like reading that and kind of being like, why are we talking about this? And then sometime later kind of being like, oh my God, like that was why. And I think that there is kind of this like really fun puzzle box aspect to the narrative as you assemble it as a reader of the book that I, because of the format, had like a really hard time doing anything like it over here. So there are kind of a lot of things that are like very, very cool about the book in its native format that I definitely became more and more cognizant of it the more that I read it with an eye towards, I'm taking it towards another format. And then there was definitely a lot of kind of, all right, let me recognize that that really works in the book and not not follow the temptation to just like be shoehorning every cool thing into the book. Okay, let's see. Favorite scene that you can tell us about, of course. There are a couple of things that I can't really tell you about in too much detail. But I will say that when we were trying out performers for this part, I basically, before I had even written like a full episode of the series, I wrote down 4 scenes. And it was a scene that was the performer that eventually became Peter having a scene with himself, the performer that eventually became Evangeline having a scene where she performed with herself, and then sort of 2 scenes where they performed with each other. And the first of those sort of 2 scenes with each other, was something that the moment that Evangeline and Peter read those 2 scenes, I sort of immediately went like, all right, number 1, they're the actors for this. They're the performers. That's it. It's them. It's their roles. They own these. I didn't know that they owned these, but like it's theirs. Boom, done. And it was also the thing that made me kind of go like, great, we're making this show, and we're making it like now. Like we're making it like this year. I'm booking some studio time. And all of those scenes ended up being in some way, shape, or form in the finished show. And that one especially was one that I think like had got very little rewrites, got very little modifications, because I was just kind of like, that's it. That's the show. So I think that's probably my favorite one. Yeah. All right. Were there some ideas that ended up impossible to execute, but you felt especially passionate about? An honorable mention of ideas, if you will. Um, ooh, the first thing that comes to mind is like so spoilery to talk about, just like in even like the vaguest of terms. Um, like let me think if there's a way to answer this. Um, I'm just thinking about like sort of like what are concepts that we had to drop. There there was a lot of kind of mechanical explanations. And again, I sort of really went into this being like, I don't want to necessarily upend the vampire lore ecosystem, but I want to make it more holistic, if you will. Which means that there were kind of a lot of things that were um, that were, you know, scenes where people talk about the history of vampires and like the traditions of them and how we know these things. And they were pretty cool ideas, I think. And some of them are still in the show in different ways. But kind of the lecture version of them. The first episode, the first draft of the first episode was 70 pages long. It got a full 30 pages cut out of it before we started production. So there's a lot of that was left in the wayside. There was a scene in the third episode that everyone loved, that I think was one of the creepiest things that I've ever written. And it was based, in order for that scene to happen, an earlier domino needed to get knocked over in episode 2, and everyone understood that that domino needed to like go a different way, but everyone hated losing that scene from episode 3 because it was one of these like so creepy, and just like even like reading it on a page, it was like, this is gonna be horrible. And it did like a couple of like fun things with audio, and kind of, you know, it was like a scene that was set completely in the dark. So I think that those were the biggest sort of like sacrifices that I still mourn. Just kind of a lot of the like, let me bring in this idea of a more holistic sort of like vampire lore up front, and then kind of going like, never mind, we're telling a story. And then sort of like a really sort of like creepy concept for a scene that eventually had to be cut. But most of the other stuff that we tried to get in there, I think that it's in there in one way, shape, or form or another. Somebody asks, after the show, would you be able to release that creepy cutscene from episode 3? Maybe. I don't love doing stuff like that. I kind of don't love even sort of like opening the door into like, here's an alternate version of this version of the story. But it's a good scene, man. Like, it was something that I was like, oh, I really don't like not having this. So we'll see. The answer might be no, but I might be persuaded. All right. Let's see. So another question from the form that we got earlier, and let me actually just refresh this form to make sure that we have not gotten more things there. Looks like we haven't. Favorite other vampire media? I think that I touched upon this a little while ago with kind of like my various favorite adaptations of Dracula. Definitely kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was something that completely changed my life. I thought I was going to be a novelist, or that I was going to try to be a novelist. And then I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I realized, wow, somebody gets paid to write episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There cannot possibly be a better job in the world than that. That's the job that I want. That's the job that I'm going to try to get. Which, now that we know more things about the conditions in which people were working on that show, it's a little bit of a tougher show to love, but it's still something that was like huge and important in my life. I love Elizabeth Kostova's the historian. I remember that as kind of like another version of Dracula that I think is like really, really cool and a really different take on him in a lot of different ways. But I do love that novel. Um, and then let's see, what's another kind of like good, different. I love the new version of Interview with the Vampire. I've been like watching it like crazy, and it is amazing good. Um, and I was sort of someone that I think I I think that I would have gotten like super 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 into the Anne Rice books if I found them a little bit earlier in life. By the time that I got to them, there were a couple of things that I was like, I don't super vibe with this. I'm having a hard time getting past this. Um, and this new version on AMC with Jacob Anderson is doing such an amazing job of telling the heart of that story while also kind of updating it in all of these smart ways and addressing a lot of those kind of like complicated dynamics that got me out of it. It's actually something that is a little bit like what I'm trying to do with this project. So yeah, so I would say that those are some good favorite other vampire media. Okay, what's the process that goes into a project like this? Um, well, it's a pretty compressed one because, I'm making this show because I want to make the show, because I've wanted to tell a Dracula adaptation for a while, but also because I have spent the last while working for very big companies, doing some shows for them that I am so excited about. But also, the bigger the show is, for the bigger the company, the longer the gestation period is. And I sort of like started in podcasting when it was like, we're gonna make a show every 2 weeks. We're gonna just like new episode every 2 weeks. Let's go. Let's always be writing. Let's always be recording. And so I missed kind of doing that. I missed sort of just like, let's get down and do something that is like fast and an independent production and just get something out there. So the way that this process went is I spent probably about 6 years idly thinking about it. And then last year, when I finally got a take, I spent kind of like a really intense year thinking about it. And I reread Dracula and annotated it. And I read a lot of other books. And I watched a ton of movies. And finally, around the start of the summer, I started floating the idea past a couple of people and kind of asking, like, is this a thing that seems doable? And then around the start of August, I wrote those test scenes and approached a couple of people. And then once Evangeline and Peter said, yes, let's do this, we will play these parts, I started to write, and I wrote the entire series in a little under a month. And then we recorded most of it in September and delayed some of it just for some illness and some travel that came up. But after that, it is kind of one of these things where, like, after that, I've been doing a dialogue edit of the episodes and getting it to the amazing Jeffrey Nils Gardner, who is doing sound design for the episodes. And the entire time that I was writing, I was also corresponding with my friend Alan Brody, who agreed to do the music for it, and also, twisting my friend and frequent collaborator Sarah Shackett's arm to ask her to please come on as a script editor and kind of a general creative consultant. And she did that and also ended up directing one of the episodes. And now it is about 2 weeks away from the release of the first episode. So it is about a 3.5 month kind of start of the process to end of production kind of a window. But it is sort of something that I want to make something with a small team and just kind of like be moving fast and doing something cool. But it is 6 announced people working on the show and 1 more person that is waiting in the wings. And I think we will probably announce them pretty soon if all goes according to plan. That is also doing a little bit of additional work for us to do something pretty cool for us. But I think that is about the general shape of the process. Okay. Next question. And again, if folks had tuned in later, please just like, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll get there. There was also somebody a little while ago, I wanted to acknowledge this. Somebody said, I can't stay, but I wanted to stop by and say how excited I am for this project, cheering you and the whole team on. Thank you so much. That means so much. And really, it's been amazing how many people have told us that they're excited about this project, that they can't wait to listen to it, that it seems like a cool idea. I'm just so happy to be making this show for me and for us, and to be having some fun with some collaborators and some artists that I know and love and wanted to work with. But it means a lot that folks are excited for it. Okay, this is a dope indie project. Do you hope it'll get picked up by a big distributor, or is it just excellent art for art's sake? I hope that it is excellent art. I really quite like it. I've now hearing the first episode, I was like, this turned out really well, and I cannot wait for the rest of you to hear it. It is mostly art for art's sake, I'll be honest. Again, I've kind of been working for giant companies for the past 4 years, and that has been amazing for my life and my career and getting to work with other people. But I've also just missed I spent so long just kind of working on shows where it was made by a small team, and as a creator I had complete end-to-end control, and I could just like be putting things out there quickly and manifesting a story quickly. So the dream would be to make this and to have people really like it, and to then be able to make a season 2 of it with Evangeline and Peter. Because it is kind of something where, if all we make is these 4 episodes, the story should feel complete and concluded. But there are other adventures that could be had. And so the dream would sort of be to get to keep making this show as kind of a like constantly on show whenever the small team can make it. As I also spend time working on big projects and doing things that take longer. Because it's been really, really cool to work on big projects, but I definitely want to be making small things that I own and that I can be putting out quickly. So that is the big, big, big dream, to just kind of like get to do this and get to constantly be making it as a thing that I like with people that I love. Okay, next question. Should Danse Macabre be adapted for screen? This is going to sound like such a fucking artist hippie thing to say. I think, and this might just be, again, because so much of the inspiration for this came from that Eddie Izzard production where she played every part in Great Expectations. I would love to adapt this show to theater. Like, I would love to adapt this show to stage. I think that just kind of like doing the like 2.5 hour stage production, I think that Peter and Evangeline would be amazing people to do it with. That would be kind of like my dream adaptation. Should it be adapted to the screen? I think that it could be a lot of fun. I think that it's kind of a different take on things. And I think that once you all kind of hear the 4 episodes of this and see where things end up, there might be some like really good ideas and some really fun ideas for how we could take this to the world of the screen. Again, right now my focus is I want to make it be good, I want people to love it. And if all that goes well and people want more of it, I would love to be making more of it. I've learned the hard way, whether things get adapted to other mediums is so out of my hands that the only thing that I can do is make it good in the medium that we're making it. All right, let's see. I'm just taking a quick glance over at the form. This is not necessarily related to Dracula the Danse Macabre, but I did say ask me anything, so I guess you can ask me anything, such as this question from this afternoon. What is my favorite pizza topping? I'm going to say mushrooms. I think the mushroom pizza is amazing and really underrated. Put more mushrooms on pizza. Tell me why I'm wrong in the chat. Yeah. Um, I don't really have more to say on that, so let's go on to the next question. As an actor who just finished a show that was super fun and is sad about it being over, how do you feel about a project ending? Oh, I mean, it's, man, you know, I'll share this much. There was a point in my life where we were recording a show, um, and we got to the last episode of it, and we planned a little rap party, just kind of like nothing too crazy, but like the actors, the cast, the crew, sort of like a couple of like the big people that were working on it. We all just like finished recording, went, had dinner together, hung out at a bar, had an amazing time. I think that it is one of like the happiest nights of my life. And I also remember once we all went our separate ways, walking to the subway and out of nowhere just like breaking out crying and like ugly sobbing, like making animal noises, bawling, just because there is this like very real, I think, like animal reaction in you of just kind of like making a show is wonderful, and it is so exhilarating, and it is so fun, and it is so exciting, and at the same time it is undeniably something that is stressful, and that is something that kind of like, like wears you down, and it is something where like it is such a high intensity emotional gauge to be working on it, and to be falling in love with the people that you are making it with, and to then all of a sudden just kind of like get to the end of it and have it just be like, that bond is broken. And hopefully you get to see all those people again, but you're not going to be back together making it the same way. um it can I've definitely been like very hit by it, and definitely just kind of been like so ravaged by the emotions of it, which is very, very real. um I think that the rap party when we did Wolf 359 is the last time that everyone that was on the core team of that show were all together in a single space, which is wild because we spent so much time for 4 years with kind of everyone in that show being super close together, in kind of like a very literal physical sense, besides the couple of actors that for the most part recorded remotely. um so it's a lot of things at the same time, like, as the director, there's a big part of you that what you feel is, you know you're relieved that you got to the end of it. You're relieved that you got everything that you needed. You're relieved that the story has been told, and that you can kind of like take it to the next level, or that if it's really, really over, that you can move on to the next thing. If it's a good story, some part of you wishes forever that that you could stay there and that you could keep making it. But I'm a big fan of that idea of, you want to leave the story when the story tells you that it's over, and it's sometimes really, really difficult to leave behind those people. But you kind of can't just like stay in the same story forever. It has to be thing in, thing out. You got to move on to the next thing. It's the only way that you grow as an artist. Yeah. All right. We've gotten to that point of the night where I'm ready to overshare about my emotions at finishing projects. Fun discoveries. Alrighty, gang. I'm looking at the form that we have over here, and it looks like we've answered kind of everything that got sent in ahead of time. So if you all have a couple more questions, please put those in the chat. But if it sort of feels like we are about done, we may wrap up soonish. But again, if you guys still have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to do this for as long as folks have questions. I'm just refreshing a couple things here. Yep, now I'm going to actually close down the form and say that we are done taking questions there. Thank you for doing this. My pleasure. It is. I have been dying to talk about this show since we decided to make it back in August. So it has been really fun to finally have, like, in October, a chance to be talking about it and sharing it with folks. We were, again, as I mentioned, we were not able to, like, record it as quickly as I wanted to. I originally was hoping that this, like, little advent calendar of Halloween would culminate with episode 1 coming out tomorrow on October 31st. But alas, this is it's gonna come out a little bit later, and instead of going until starting in October, we're gonna get to go to Christmas. So I've got a good, like, Nightmare Before Christmas kind of a vibe for it. Alrighty, I think that we are about to hit the 1 hour mark. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I think we're gonna call it here for tonight. Thank you all so much for asking amazing questions, and thank you so much for coming in, hanging out. I really, really appreciate you all. We're going to be back. I want to do another one of these that hopefully I can bully some other people that worked on the show into being on here to answer a couple of questions. So thank you all so much for tuning in. It means the world to me. And yeah, we will be back soon, and we will be back with the first episode of Dracula, the Danse Macabre in 2 weeks' time. So everybody, thank you so much. Stay safe. Have a great, great Halloween. And thank you so much for coming by and hearing me ramble. Can't wait to share the show with y'all. Have a good night.